Okay. Let us continue with Part 2 for Volume 3, Part 2. Johan's task. Benno finished the paperwork while I chatted with Frida. It would take several days for the registration to be processed, which meant our business in the Merchant's Guild was done. Bye-bye, Frida. I waved goodbye to Frida and walked to the stairs myself, but the second floor had so many people that I needed Benno to carry me to avoid being crushed. The moment Benno took his first step onto the floor to begin pushing through, a loud shout echoed over the murmuring of the crowd. Wait, please wait, Gilberta Company girl! Shouted the person. Benno and I looked at each other. Looks like Karina has some crazy fans. Idiot, you weren't in my arms. He's definitely talking to you. Ignoring things you don't like won't change reality. But I mean, I don't want to talk to anyone shouting in a place with this many people, especially if he's calling me the Gilberta Company girl when I'm not even Benno's daughter. I don't exactly like how everyone's staring at us, so let's go outside. He'll follow us if it's really that important, I said, hurrying Benno on as we exited the guild. As expected, the person followed us. Benno stopped in the central plaza outside the guild and set me down. I turned around to see a younger guy with bright orange hair tied behind his head burst out of the guild and start running this way. Oh, that's Johan! As I pondered the fact that I had always been wearing my Gilberta Company apprentice clothes when ordering things from Johan, he finally reached us. What's your business? Asked Benno from behind me. Johan, who was now gasping for air, knelt down in front of me and the fountain amid the large crowd of passerby going through the central plaza. Please become my patron. Come again? I could feel the crowd staring daggers into us. I could even hear some of them whispering about what was happening, which made me feel unbearably awkward. Johan, there are a lot of people here, so maybe we should go to your workshop. No, answered Benno. If you've got something to talk about, you can discuss it in my store. Benno rejected the idea of us going to Johan's store, instead saying we should talk at his. I had thought it would be best to avoid going there since Johan was mistaking me for Benno's daughter, but he wasn't letting that fly. It'll be better for you and me both if I know what you're about to jump into next. Talk with me and let's there. Okay, in that case, Johan, would you come to the Gilberta Company with me? I asked, and Johan stood up, a sparkle in his eyes. Yes, of course. What father wouldn't be worried about sending his daughter to a workshop alone? He's not my father. She's not my daughter. Benno and I shouted at the exact same time. As Johan's mouth dropped and his eyes widened, I took a firm step forward and looked up at him. I'm mine. Benno helps me out a lot, but he's not my dad, and I'm not even an apprentice at the Gilberta Company. What? But you wear their apprentice clothes and you have a guild card. Murmuring in disbelief, Johan paled and began to list out all the reasons he thought we were related. Mine's the forewoman of her own workshop, and I'm her financial guardian. Given your age, I'm guessing you want to talk about your test? Fair enough then, follow me. Benno spoke with a resigned sigh, and then hefted me up and started walking. That was exactly the kind of thing that made people think we were related, but he hated my slow walking speed too much to stop. He walked entirely at his own pace, forcing Johan to power walk to keep up and Lutz to break into a jog. Hey, are these two really not related? Johan quietly asked Lutz, refusing to give up on the matter. They're not. Master Benno's a bachelor, replied Lutz with exasperation. Benno heard their whispered conversation and glared at Johan, who jerked in fear and straightened up. I saw it all since I was looking over Benno's shoulder. When we entered Benno's office, Lutz followed Mark upstairs to go make tea. Johan, as a simple craftsman in a smithy, had probably never been taken to the office of a big store owner before. He looked around timidly while sitting in the chair offered to him. It was hard to think he was the same person who had briefly shouted, "Please become my patron," in the middle of a busy plaza. Benno, what was that test you were talking about? I asked while leaning over the table, having climbed under my chair. Benno's eyes moved to Johan. It's your business, Johan, you explain. Johan jerked and straightened his back once again as he was met by Benno's glare. He looked between me and Benno several times while searching for words. Eventually, he took a deep breath and began. When a Laharl in the smithing guild comes of age, they have to pass a test to be recognized as an adult. Johan must not have been much of a skilled speaker, as he spoke in a quiet, deliberate tone while searching for words. The test was to get one of the customers who recognized your skill to fund your efforts as a patron. The patron would give the Laharl a task, which would have to be completed within a year. Some patrons would ask for weapons, and others for everyday items. More important than the task itself, however, was the patron they found. Their satisfaction with the completed product was of course important, but what really mattered was securing continued support for the workshop in the future. If a smith failed the test, their Laharl contract would be made null and void, forcing them down to the position of a Lahange. But you're pretty good, Johan. Won't it be easy for you to find a patron? I asked curiously. Johan lowered his eyes before slowly shaking his head. I always get so finicky about details that customers don't like me too much. Johan wanted precise details about his orders and would repeatedly ask questions to find these details out, which made customers conclude that he was so unskilled he couldn't make anything without tedious hand-holding. In some ways, it wasn't wrong to conclude that one mark of a skilled craftsman was the ability to make what a customer wanted based on rough instructions alone. But Johann had the skill to make precise instructions a reality, and had more or less been doing all the precise orders his workshop conceived by himself. Naturally, the foreman of Johann's workshop didn't want to let him go, but there was nothing he could do if Johann didn't pass the smithing guild's test. I'm the only Laharo in the whole guild without a patron, and I'm coming of age at the end of autumn, so I'm really at the end of my rope here. There was a baptism ceremony at the beginning of each season, and a coming-of-age ceremony at the end of each season. Given how late into autumn we were, Johann didn't really have much time left to find a patron. Sorry to keep you waiting, Master Benno. Les and Mark climbed down the stairs holding tea. Mark distributed the cups before leaving, and Les moved behind Benno, who took a sip of tea before glancing at Johann. Mine may be a forewoman, but she's still a kid. I'm sure your boss wasn't a fan of that, Benno said, making Johann shrink down a bit. He wasn't, but she's our only customer who brings detailed blueprints from me. It seemed that most people were opposed to someone underage like me being a patron. Reason being, there weren't many kids with a lot of their own money to use. But I had a guild card. I respected Johann's talent, and I had a history of making big orders. On top of that, I happily answered Johann's detailed questions, praised his work, and asked specifically for him. It seemed that by requesting his work multiple times, I had become qualified to become his patron. But as I was underage, I would need the consent of a parent or guardian. You're the only one who could be my patron now. My foreman kicked me out of the workshop and told me it'd be a long shot, but I had to try. It seemed he had assumed the daughter of a big store would be willing to become a patron for show while actually using her father's money. On top of that, Johann would get the prestige of securing the Gilberta Company as a patron. Turns out you aren't actually related, though. Johann slumped his shoulders. Due to Benno carrying me around in workshops and the Merchants Guild, on top of me making expensive orders while wearing Gilberta Company apprentice clothes, it seemed everyone had thought for sure that I was his daughter, which reminded me that Otto had mentioned that we would look like father and daughter to everyone around us. Given the age gap, I could hardly blame them. But to Benno, the bachelor, that was nothing but frustrating. He glared at me with harsh eyes. Of course mine's not my daughter. I wouldn't raise an idiot with no common sense like her. My daughter'd have at least as much sense as Karina does, said Benno, who had raised his little sister himself after the parents died when they were young. I pursed my lips into a sharp pout and glared at him as hard as I could, but sadly, Benno was ultimately more annoyed with being treated like my dad than I was for being treated as his daughter. Does that mean you can't be my patron, then? Johann picked up the tense atmosphere, starting to stand up with a defeated expression. But I grabbed onto his sleeve. I had something I wanted him to do, regardless of all this guild test business. Him needing a patron was just an added convenience. Benno. There's something I want Johann to make. I smiled at Benno while still holding Johann's sleeve, and he rubbed his temples while letting out a sigh that told me he had already seen this coming. All right, I'll give you my permission as your guardian and be the co-signer. Benno granted his permission while waving a hand dismissively. The one most surprised to see him grant permission so casually was actually Johann. If the patron runs out of money, the co-signer will have to. You think a merchant doesn't know what being a co-signer means? Don't sweat it. I don't need to worry about mine running out of money. Co-signing for her hardly matters, said Benno with a shrug. He knew that even if I did run out of money, I could get it all back by selling the books we were printing now, and my info about the candles would help to further smooth things out. You just got your hands on a patron that won't run out of money, you know. Every craftsman wanted a rich patron more than they could say. Benno's words made Johann light up with glee. That's amazing. You're really going to leave my patron mine? Miss Mine? Johann faltered as he mused over what to call me, earning him a light smack from Benno. Hey, don't you know you gotta respect your patrons? I know she's just a little girl and looks an age, but she's paying to keep you alive. Call her Lady Mine if you know what's good for you. Sorry, Lady Mine then. Johann hurriedly corrected himself. I smiled and waved my hand to say he didn't have to worry about it. Far be it from me to care what people call me. Titles weren't important to me, but the task I was about to give him was. Okay, Johann, I reckon I'll have the catalog and detailed blueprints of what I want you to make at your workshop by tomorrow. If I put my all into it, I could probably even iron out the production process and the finer details on the blueprints by the end of today. I clenched my fist with determination as Johann blinked in surprise. Catalog? Like, multiple things? But the test is only supposed to be making a single thing. Well, it is one thing. The metal letter types all belong to one set. The 35-letter alphabet in this world had uppercase and lowercase letters just like English did, but were otherwise similar to Japanese hiragana and katakana. Naturally, I would need letter types for both the uppercase and lowercase letters. After all, the terms uppercase and lowercase were historically derived from where the cases containing these letter types were organized in print shops. 50 of each vowel sound and 20 of each consonant should be enough. If I'm going to be your patron, I want you to make metal letter types. I imagine it'll be a pretty arduous task since each one is uniquely detailed and there's so many. But, well, that's how it is. Do you regret choosing me as your patron? I gave a brief explanation of what letter types were, which made Johann blink in wide-eyed surprise. He looked to Benno and Lutz for help, and the two then looked at each other before exchanging light nods. Listen to what people say more. I told you she'd be a good patron because she won't run out of money, yeah? You should have thought about why I didn't say anything else, said Benno. If you don't think you can keep up with Mine's craziness, you should give up now and go find someone else. She's always like this, Lutz added. It was hard to say whether they were giving him warnings or words of support. Either way, Johann clenched his fist on his lap and shut his eyes tight. After a moment of deep thought, he looked at me, eyes filled with determination. I'll do it. Please become my patron. Hang on. Okay, it is recording. Okay. I kicked things into high gear and finished the blueprints and detailed instructions before the day was over. I then brought them to Johann's workshop the next morning. Judging by how surprised he appeared when I arrived, he must not have actually expected me to complete the blueprints so quickly. But they got him so pumped up that I was sure he'd be fine. Looks like we're one step closer to movable type printing, Lutz. You sure look like you're having fun, Mine. If we can get over this challenge, movable type printing will be right around the corner. Once Johann has finished the letter types, I'll modify a press to make a real printer. That'll be in the spring, though. I need to spend the winter making lots of money. The Ink Guild and the beginning of winter. As autumn came to a close, we finished printing our second batch of children's Bibles. I put aside the 20 we were going to use as textbooks and sold the other 40 to Benno, earning 6 large gold. After months of scraping by the poverty line, I was suddenly rich. Not long after, Fran and Rosina came to my place to talk to my family about my health over the upcoming winter, and in the following days I used the money earned from the picture books to fill out my winter preparations even more. And with that, I, my family, and the orphanage had all finished our respective winter preparations just as the weather got cold enough that it seemed it might snow at any moment. Let's give me a report as we made our way home from the temple. Mine, Master Benno said the head of the Ink Guild and the foreman of the ink workshop came to see him this morning. I guess they noticed the new ink we're using. As predicted, rich people with connections to nobles were beginning to buy the children's books from the Gilberta Company. You could tell from a single glance that the ink used wasn't normal ink. There was a big difference between blue-tinged galnet ink and the solid black paint ink made from soot and oil. Naturally, the Ink Guild noticed this right away and started searching for who had made it, but nobody in the guild knew anything. Nobody except the foreman of the ink workshop that I had visited, that is. They said that a kid from the Gilberta Company knew how to make a different kind of ink. That revelation sent the head of the Ink Guild and the foreman in question straight to the Gilberta Company, specifically to ask Benno whether he intended to make another ink guild for his new ink. The Gilberta Company had a precedent for making new guilds. They had fought against the Parchment Guild to make the Plant Paper Guild and its accompanying workshops, which were now filling the market with plant paper somewhat cheaper than parchment. Although there was an agreement that parchment would still be used for official contracts, plant paper was vastly outselling it thanks to the fact that it could be mass-produced. It only made sense that those with a vested interest in ink would be on guard after Benno started using different ink on that plant paper to sell books. Master Benno wants you to come to the store tomorrow. He's got something to talk to you about. Okay, that was a standard affair for me, and the next day, Lutz and I went to the Gilberta Company first before going to the temple. Morning, Benno. There you are, Mine. Glad you came. Benno gestured at me to sit at the table while Lutz climbed up the back stairs. As a Laharo, Lutz was practicing how to make and serve tea to visitors. I sat down after seeing Lutz off, at which point Benno set his pen down and headed to the table. He sat down in front of me and began immediately. As I expected, the Ink Guild came knocking. You said you wanted to teach them how to make the ink, and then let them make it all, yeah? Yes, if you keep expanding your business into so many different fields, you just end up with more enemies, and making ink really has nothing to do with the Gilberta Company's main line of work anyway. As long as they let the mine workshop keep making its own ink, I won't mind selling the production process and letting them take care of the rest. The mass production of ink would be important for spreading print around the world, but trying to manage both processes by ourselves might end up being too much to handle. It made more sense to me to let other people take over these jobs where possible. How much money are you thinking? About as much as I'm giving to the temple, so how about 10% of the profits? My suggestion made Benno shake his head with a grimace. You're pricing it too low. But the profits will go way up as the ink spreads. And I want them to sell the ink for cheap, just like plant paper is being sold for cheap. My thought process was founded entirely on spending the product spreading the product as far as possible, but Benno dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. At least raise it to 30% for the first 10 years. Then you can bump it down to 20% for the 10 years after that. Then 10% for the rest of the time. That's about fair for what you're bringing to the table. You shouldn't sell new technology so short. Okay, I'll leave the percentages to you. Benno was no doubt going with 30% instead of something much higher to accommodate me. I knew he had my best interests in mind, so I felt comfortable leaving all that to him. Here's the tea. Let's came down the stairs looking tense as he set cups down in front of us. Benno picked up his cup, examining its contents with a sharp look in his eyes before taking a sip. Not quite there yet. It definitely isn't great, but he's getting better, Let's. Do you want Fran to help you a little? He's a good teacher. Both Gil and Delia are way better at making tea now. That sounds good. Les is working hard under Mark's supervision, but his tea wasn't good enough to serve to any other visitors yet. For now, he is practicing on me. That just leaves the contract magic. You think we should use it? Contract magic was expensive enough that it was generally only used when nobles were involved. Benno had signed magic contracts with me twice before, but both times he was thinking long-term and laying the groundwork to protect me from nobles. But this time we were just dealing with the Ink Guild, which as far as I knew didn't have any nobles in it. The deal we're making will last a long time and involve a lot of money. It's worth it, and personally I don't trust the Ink Guild's head at all. Might as well play it safe with contract magic. This will be a contract with the Ink Guild itself, not him. A contract with the Ink Guild? It seemed that the groups were seen as separate legal entities in this world as well. I tilted my head in thought, and Benno gave a slow nod. Yep, it'll be important in ensuring that the contract remains in effect even when the head eventually changes. It seemed that there were many historical cases where people assuming positions of power decided not to honor contracts that their predecessor had signed. It had happened enough times for the judiciary system here to develop the concept of a legal person. We'll sell the ink production process to the guild. They'll let the mine workshop keep making its own ink. We'll make them price the ink cheaper so it'll spread along with the plant paper. We get 30% of their profits from the ink. That amount will change every 10 years. Sound good? Be sure to tell them that the ink isn't good for use on parchment since it doesn't soak in very much. After confirming the details of Benno and Lutz, Mark knocked and stepped inside. Master Benno, 2 visitors from the Ink Guild are here. Let them in once I ring the bell. As you wish. Mark left the room. Benno immediately stood up and set me down on the floor from my chair with a grim expression. He then jutted his chin toward Lutz, who responded with a silent nod before opening the inner door to the stairs. Mine, I'll negotiate with the Ink Guild. You don't want to let them see you. Stay with Karina, and I'll send the magic contract up for you to sign once it's all written down. Why jump through so many hoops to hide me? Because they could kidnap you? Duh! I thought it would be pretty weird to sign a contract with one party absent. I blinked in surprise, and after glaring at where the visitors were probably waiting in the other room, Benno explained in a low, dark voice. The foreman of the workshop might be alright, but the head of the guild has connections to merchant nobles, and I don't hear a lot of good things about him. There are a lot of bad rumors. You'd be better off not letting him see you. Duh. Okay, I'll trust you on this. I was really curious about this man from the Ink Guild, but I went ahead and climbed the stairs to Karina's room with Lutz. Once there, he immediately turned to head back downstairs since it was his job to deliver the magic contract paper. Lutz, tell me what the head of the Ink Guild is like later, okay? Yeah, sure. After seeing Lutz off, I turned to Karina. Sorry about this, Karina. I just barged in out of nowhere. It's fine, mine. Let's use this opportunity to do the temporary stitching for your robes. Okay, sorry for giving you such a big job that needs to be done so quickly. Karina guided me to the parlor with a gentle expression. Along the way, we saw Otto in the hall, who met us with a friendly wave. He must have been off work today just like Dad was. Sheesh, mine. I can't believe you'd make Karina do hard work for an arch noble when she's this pregnant. Otto, how many times have I told you not to poke your nose into my work? I'm just worried about you, Karina. Otto didn't back down even after getting a hard glare from Karina. They were as lovey-dovey as ever. I watched Karina kick Otto out of the room like she might a petulant child, wondering whether her regular headaches were actually being caused by Otto rather than her pregnancy. I'm worried about you too, Karina. Has Otto been going overboard lately? He and Dad are famous at the gate for being love crazy. Is he so excited for his first baby that he's causing problems? My, is that what people say about him? I imagine your mother has it just as rough as I do then. Karina laughed and brought over some blue fabric, which she began spreading on top of a large table. Do you think you'll be able to finish the ceremonial robes? You really haven't been given enough time. It will certainly be a struggle. The workshop is very busy, but it's still rare for us to get work from arch nobles, so our seamstresses are giving it their all. We charged them quite a lot after all. It seemed that when dyeing the cloth for my first set of robes, they also had dyed extra cloth of the same color, to use on another order made by someone else. They were using the extra cloth now, and apparently everyone in the workshop was working at full speed on the embroidery. We still need to do the first fitting for that other order, which gives us plenty of time to dye new cloth before the deadline. But we were told to finish these robes as soon as possible, and while we don't have the time to use different cloth for your first fitting, I can't imagine you're grown enough for the measurements to be too different from last time. Yeah, most likely not. As she spoke, Karina placed the blue cloth on me with fastening needles stuck through it. It was hard for her to do with her big belly, and it looked like everything she did was a struggle for her. I'm sorry, mine. I'll have to call a maid to help. This is a little too much for me to do on my own. Your belly really is big now. Is it almost time? Yes, I've been told to expect it around the middle of winter. The baby is quite energetic. It's always kicking around in there. Perhaps it's a boy. Karina rubbed her big belly while ringing a bell to summon a maid. But it was Otto who came inside saying, "You rang?" and looked eager for help. I couldn't help but laugh at Karina's exasperated expression. Now that mine's stolen Benno away from us, I think it's about time I give up and accept my new life working in the Gilberta Company. Otto, what do you mean I've stolen Benno away from you? I don't even have the arm strength to pick Benno up, let alone take him anywhere. It means what it means. As your financial guardian, Benno's planning to keep on expanding his business, which is why he's in the middle of beating how the Gilberta Company works into my head, Otto said with a small shrug as he started to help Karina. He was actually doing a pretty good job, a sign that he had been working hard to learn. Otto, you look so in your element here that I almost forgot you're a soldier. At this rate, it might not be long before you open up your own store with Karina, huh? Well, it'll be a few years at the very least. I'll be working hard for Karina and our baby's sake. Yes, dear, work your hands, not your mouth. Karina finished the temporary stitching while giving instructions to Otto. The length was fine, so we decided to go with the same measurements as last time. She then chased Otto out again and fixed up my hair, which had gotten disheveled from the temporary stitching. As I was putting my upper layer of clothing back on, a knock rang out from further in the house, followed by Mark announcing himself. We could hear the footsteps of someone walking in to let Mark in. I hurriedly finished dressing myself and nodded right as Mark knocked on the parlor door. Please come in. Excuse me, Karina. Mark came inside with a sheet of contract paper, and Liz followed behind him with a jar of ink. He spread the magic contract out on the round table and confirmed each point with me. It was pretty much exactly what I had discussed with Benno, and the numbers being in our favor showed that Benno had won the negotiations. There was just one point I didn't recognize, a line stating the contents of this contract will be recorded in the Ink Guild regulations. Mark, what does this part about the Ink Guild regulations mean? Guild regulations must be upheld by all the workshops belonging to the guild. In short, the contents of the contract being recorded in the Ink Guild's regulation means that they will apply to the Ink Guilds and Ink workshops of other cities as well. The magic contract itself was only magically binding in Ehrenfest, but the guild regulations were upheld across all cities. As such, while there were a number of different Ink Guilds, they all followed the same regulations, though there were slight variations in rules depending on the city and the workshop in question. The way I saw it, guild regulations are pretty much like federal law that existed on top of regional laws. But how will the Ink Guilds of other cities know to apply these rules? Is there some kind of communication between them? They are buying the production process for this ink precisely because it will be profitable to them. It's only natural that this Ink Guild would send word to their fellow Ink Guilds in neighboring cities. They will amend their copy of the regulations after learning the production process. I nodded at Mark's explanation and grabbed the ink. The contract already had Benno's and the Ink Guild's names written on it, but not the name of the head of the guild itself. I wrote my name as close to the bottom as possible. So Lutz, what kind of person was the head of the Ink Guild? He had a nasty look in his eyes. He was searching for you. What? Lutz clenched his fist and explained, speaking quietly. He told Master Benno that he knew a kid had brought up the new ink in his workshop. He said, let me see her if she's here. I think Master Benno was right to hide you. He felt a lot worse than the Guildmaster. If Lutz was saying that this man was a lot worse than the Guildmaster, he must have been really bad. Lutz and Benno both being on guard around him was a sign that I should be on my guard too. But anyway, mine, hold out your hand, said Lutz, readying his knife. I winced, remembering that contract magic needed blood, and then held out my hand. A sharp, sudden pain shot through my fingertip, and blood puckered out. I pressed it against the contract, which then burst into a golden flame, burning the paper away and sealing the agreement. It looked as magical as ever. Mine, said Mark. Please wait here quietly until Master Benno calls for you. I know, Mark. With the contract signed, I passed the time by talking to Karina about her baby and ignoring Otto's weeping about how I wouldn't be able to help him with work over the winter. Yeah, she wouldn't be able to. It was about lunchtime when Benno rushed up the stairs with a furious look in his eyes. Mine, I sent Mark to take Lutz home and call for your dad and sister to come get you. Don't even think about leaving until they're here. What? Did something happen? I stood up and raced to Benno, who looked out the window with his brow deeply furrowed. I sent Lutz out on an errand to the Merchants Guild, and on the way there were some men ganged up on him. I started asking questions about the Gilberta Company girl. Said he must know about you since he's a Lahurl and brought the contract up. That must mean they're... I trailed off, and Benno gave a deliberate nod. They must have been from the Ink Guild, but I can't figure out why they'd start hunting for info after signing the contract. It made sense for them to want to gather information beforehand to help get better terms for themselves or something along those lines. But the contract was already signed. They had cornered Lutz, even though that would obviously put us on guard, and we had no idea why. And there was no greater fear than the fear of the unknown. There might be something going on behind the scenes here. Keep your eyes and ears wide open out there. Right. Mine were here. Dad, Thule. They both just come off work, and judging by how heavy their breathing was, must have rushed over here at full speed. My apologies for calling you over, said Benno to Dad, standing up from his seat. Nah, I appreciate you going out of the way to protect my daughter. Mind if I ask what the heck is going on? The Ink Guild has definitely got their eyes on her, but I don't know who's pulling the strings, explained Benno. The fact that they're hunting for information after the contract was signed is strange, and them going after Lutz just doesn't make sense. I could see my dad's eyes harden. Thule, looking nervous, gave me a tight hug. I'm thinking mine will be safest if you send her to the temple now, Benno continued. I'll leave the decision up to you and your wife, but they won't be able to do anything to her if she's in the temple. It'll also buy us time to dig for information ourselves. Right. Dad gave a grave nod, then picked me up with his brow furrowed deeply. What do you think, Mine? Do you want to go to the temple, or do you want to go home? In all honesty, I wanted Dad to take me home so I wouldn't be lonely, but that would make it more likely that these people will go after Lutz and my family. I don't want to leave so soon, but I don't want anything to happen to you or Lutz even more. I'll go to the temple. The snow's going to start soon anyway. I put on a brave face, but the idea of living in the temple made me unspeakably nervous. I squeezed Dad's shirt hard, and so my winter in the temple began. Winter hibernation and handiwork. Dad and Thule took me to my chambers in the temple, where Fran greeted us with wide eyes. He looked between me and them, blinking rapidly. Did something happen, sister mine? Sorry to barge in like this, Fran. He started to usher me in, but I stopped him and said that I didn't want Delia to hear about before beginning to explain the situation in the doorway. I explained that the head of the Ink Guild was targeting me, that Lutz was accosted by a group of men, and that I would start living in the temple a bit sooner than planned for safety's sake. I also mentioned that while we didn't know what the head of the Ink Guild was after, nor did I know his name, we did know that he had connections to nobles and had a lot of bad rumors surrounding him, which meant we should avoid mentioning this to Delia. Fran listened to everything with a frown, then gave a deliberate nod. Understood. I would ask you to tell the high priest what you've told me. Fran, began Dad, squeezing his hand on my shoulder. We're going to try to find out what's going on here ourselves. For now, I'm leaving mine to you. But I'll be coming back to check up on her. Fran nodded, looking right back at him. You may count on me. Your visits will no doubt be the warmth that gets Sister Mine through the winter. Mind, don't be too much for a handful for them. And be sure to tell the high priest everything. Nothing good comes from a lack of communication with your boss. Dad gave some very soldier-like advice, which I responded to with a smile and 2 taps of my right fist against the left side of my chest. His expression softened, then he gave a similar salute. Thule gave me a tight hug and then looked at me, her big blue eyes wavering with unease. Bye, Mine. I'll come on my next day off. Be good while I'm gone, okay? Okay, I'll be waiting for you. After seeing Dad and Thule off, I went into my chambers. Despite having my own room here, spending the night in the temple made me a little nervous. My attendants were all surprised to see me arrive out of nowhere right before dinner time. What brings you here today, sister mine? Due to certain circumstances, my winter stay in the temple has been moved forward, and now begins today. What circumstances? Asked Delia, her head cocked to the side. I shook my head. I can't give any details since nobles might be involved. Delia tried to start changing me into my blue robes, but I stopped her since I didn't have any plans to go out today. That said, I didn't have much else to do. I looked around the room, thinking about how I was usually home by this time. What do you all do when it gets this late? I could tell what Rosina did without even looking. She was playing her harpspiel. She really did play for as long as she could before the 7th bell curfew. Delia was carrying hot water from the kitchen, likely to prepare the bath. It seemed that bath time was where women polished their charms. I had a lot to learn from Delia's girl power. Gil was running a report on his slate about the mine workshop's activity for the day and the products it had finished. It was a report based on how the Gilberta Company managed its stock, and Lutz was having Gil write them as part of his training. Fran was finalizing reports on the food and supplies consumed by the orphanage and my chamber so that he could prepare orders for more stock. He was busy every day with all sorts of different paperwork. Still, he said things were a lot easier on him now that he could split the work with Rosina and Wilma. I guess I'll write a letter to the high priest requesting a meeting with him. I sat down at my work desk and began writing a letter to the high priest, asking to talk to him so I could tell him what had happened. It would be days before he replied, though, so who knew how long it would be before we could talk. After finishing my letter, I began planning for the next picture books. Guided by Frida's advice, I decided to make new children's Bibles with stories of the subordinate gods beneath the Eternal Five, organized by their set season. I ate a fancy dinner delivered to my table, took a lavish bath in hot water with Delia's help, and then got in my warm bed alone. It was so big that I could stretch my arms and legs as much as I wanted. To my side, I could see a table with a water pitcher, a cup, and a bell to summon my attendants. Good morning. Good night, Sister Mine. Good night, Delia. Good night, Rosina. The curtain around my canopy bed shut, leaving me alone in my wide bed in complete darkness. Despite the delicious food, the bath filled with warm water, nobody got mad over me using, and the comfy bed with plenty of space, I would much rather have eaten around the table with my family, had a bed in a shallow tub that had only a little hot water while playing around with Thule, and be sleeping in a smaller bed while clinging to my family for extra warmth. Getting homesick after a single day away sure is lame. I had attendants, but there was a firm line drawn between us. I was their master, and they were my servants. They would treat me with respect, but I wasn't allowed to get emotionally involved with them. I was stuck in bed, more sad and alone than I could describe, racked with fear of whoever was targeting me. Morning in the temple came late, or to be more precise, morning came early for attendants, while I, on the other hand, was stuck in bed waiting for them to finish preparing breakfast. If I tried getting up before they were done, Delia would yell at me angrily, saying that I had to go back to sleep until they called for me. There I learned that noble daughters had to fake being asleep in bed until their attendants were ready for them. Will she get mad if I sneakily read books to pass the time? Now then, let us begin practice. After our light breakfast, it was time to practice the harpspiel with Rosina. She prepared the instruments with a smile, commenting on how lovely it was that she didn't have to wait for me to arrive at the temple anymore. By the time she and I started practice, Delia and Gil were cleaning the room and drawing water while Fran was going to the high priest to deliver my letter and give a brief rundown of the situation. When he got back, he said that the high priest had given me a strict order to remain in my chambers until further notice while he investigated the situation. It seemed that I would be spending my days not only stuck in the temple, but stuck in my chambers as well. Music practice ended at third bell. Since I couldn't leave my chambers, I passed my time teaching Delia letters and simple math while working out the plans for my next picture book. You're a surprisingly good teacher, Sister Mine. Much easier to understand than Gil. You think so? Perhaps I should teach in the temple school as well, I said, my voice coming out a bit shyly since I wasn't used to Delia complimenting me. Fran gave me a somewhat dubious look and asked what the temple school was. A place of education where I will teach the kids to read and write. Is this plan set in stone? Yes, I've already made plans to hold sessions throughout the winter. Fran blinked repeatedly in surprise and slowly shook his head. Sister Mine, I do not believe you have informed me about that. Please explain exactly what you intend to do and in what way. What? But it's all written down right here. I pulled up my winter schedule sheet and handed it to Fran. He looked over it, then murmured, This will be the temple school. With lowered eyes, it seemed that he hadn't fully understood me when I said I was going to educate the kids. He had thought the Thule's sewing classroom and let's teaching them to do winter handiwork would be the extent of their education. But, chimed in Gil, I don't know how much you're going to need to teach them, Sister Mine. They can already read a bit thanks to the karta and picture books you gave them. He shrugged, and I faltered, stumbling over my words. I want them to learn to write, too. It'll be easier for them to work for nobles as attendants if they know how to read and write, surely. And if they know how to count and do math, they'll even be able to run the workshop and orphanage by themselves. I think knowing these things is better than not knowing them. I brought up the workshop report Gil had been writing yesterday, which made my point click with everyone. Gil was still bad at reading large numbers, so he had been writing his reports with the help of the Grey Priests. Sister Mine, where do you intend to hold this temple school? In the dining hall of the orphanage so both boys and girls can participate. I'll be the teacher. Please leave teaching to the Grey Priests. That manner of activity is beneath you, Sister Mine. Fran and Rosina shot my idea down together. I was stuck working behind the scenes as always. Eventually, I decided to make something resembling a school curriculum, which I would teach Delia first in my chambers. Fran and Rosina would learn from my example, then do the teaching themselves in the dining hall. They would train Grey Priests who were formerly attendants to teach as well, then quit whenever the time was right, thereby establishing the temple school. Darn, I kind of wanted to be a teacher, seeing as I'm apparently so good at it. For the temple school, I established a goal of teaching all the kids to write the alphabet and do addition and subtraction with one-digit numbers. I had a bunch of stone slates and slate pens prepared, not to mention the children's Bibles to use as textbooks. Fourth bell rang not long after I had worked out the general flow of how things would go. I ate lunch and was drinking tea with Lutz visited. You holding up all right, Mine? He had finally been given the go-ahead to come and visit after Benno did a thorough check to make sure nobody suspicious was following him. I raced down the stairs and ran to Lutz as he waved to me from the hallway. Lutz, give me a hug. Whoa. I jumped into Lutz's arms, demanding a hug. I had been so starved for warmth that I needed him to recharge me. In my Arano days, I had been fine with nothing but books in my life, but perhaps due to adjusting to this child's body, or perhaps due to growing used to my huggy family, I now craved the warmth of other people. I'm so lonely without my family here, I want to go home already. It's only been a single night, Lutz gave an exasperated grin at my complaining and shook his head, but I couldn't help how I felt. I'll get used to it eventually. This is the loneliest I'll be all winter. I don't know about that. Who's to say it might not just get worse and worse? If it gets worse than this, I might just die of loneliness. I was stuck in my chambers without even the option to go to the book room to read, and there were no books in my chambers other than the children's Bibles. If I had to keep living without my family here, I might very well lose the will to live. That hardly sounds like a joke, 'cause you always do end up close to dying when I take my eyes off you. I'll suck it up and survive the loneliness, so I want you to suck this up and let me hug you. Fine. Let's let me cling to him until I was satisfied. Then, my arms still around him, he looked over the report Gil had written and compared it to his own, pointing out any errors in his calculations. I got various complaints from my attendants, so I stabilized my emotions by clinging to Gil. A few, I remember. How shameless. A proper lady would never. Geez, you should at least go after a rich noble boy with lots of money. Hey! Dude, is she not allowed to hug her friend? Good lord. I feel bad for noble ladies. They have it so rough. Why don't you rely on me like that, sister mine? I mean, if they would let her, she would hug you, Gil. But I ignored them all. The winter ahead of me would be long and cold. For the sake of my mental health, I needed to get warmth wherever I could find it. Oh, right, mine. The workshop's out of stuff to do. What's our next step? Starting the winter handiwork? The second round of printing was done, and although we had the stencils to print more, there was no more paper to turn into books. We couldn't make any more either since the river was freezing cold now. Not to mention that now that the winter preparations were done, we would be running out of soot for our ink. Okay, I'll explain how the winter handiwork will go, so could you go get the tools and boards for reversey from the workshop? Sure, let's go, Gil. Right. Lutz and Gil came back carrying boards and tools. They set them on the table in the hall, and I began explaining how to make reversey boards and discs. These thick boards are what we're going to use as the game boards. Using a ruler and a soot pen, keep drawing straight lines until you have 8 squares by 8 squares. I explained drawing out example lines on the board using my own soot pen. Once the lines are drawn, you cut grooves along them using one of these. I pointed at a carving tool with a triangular blade. I ordered it from the smithy after asking a carpenter about triangular bladed tools. Once the grooves are dug out, draw the lines on again using ink. You'll just be tracing the grooves, so I think the ink should stay inside them pretty nicely, but do be careful not to let any splash out. Alright. Cut the thin boards into 64 squares to match the size of the game board squares. Then polish them so they're smooth and nice to touch. After that, you just have to cover one side with ink, so once you're finished cutting them out, all the hard work is over. Also, I explained that for faux shogi, or rather faux chess, you cut out the board just like you would for reversey, but instead of covering one side, you wrote a letter on them. That made Lutz grimace. Hey, mine, think we could print the letters on instead? Why? Not a lot of people in the orphanage know how to write, and not all of those who can are that great. Those letters are going to be small, and I'm thinking it'd be a problem if the writing's too bad to read. Good point. Guess I can make a stencil for it. Lutz wrote down all the steps down on his diptych as I continued. I myself wrote down the things I would need to improve or think about in my own diptych. Gil, who had been watching our standard discussion, glared at Lutz with his purple eyes. You've been having Sister Mine teach you everything like that, Lutz? Yeah, she can't work in the workshop since she's a blue shrine maiden, so she's got to teach me what to do ahead of time so I can make sure the shop gets it right. I thought you knew everything and were like amazing, but it's actually Sister Mine who's amazing. Gil pouted, his cheeks puffed out. I poked him with my finger. Gil, Lutz really is amazing. He only needs to hear my explanation once before he can repeat it on the workshop and get stuff done. You were listening as well just now, but you wouldn't be able to teach someone else what to do, would you? I wouldn't. Gil looked down at the floor, then shot his head back up and pointed at Lutz's diptych. But that's just because I don't have a diptych. I'd be amazing too if I had one. Oh, right, you've learned to read 'em right now. I guess you might need one yourself soon if you're going to be writing those workshop reports. I can't go outside right now, but I'll get one made for you when spring comes. Really? All right, I'm definitely going to beat Lutz. Gil held his head high and declared himself Lutz's rival, earning him a casual good luck winning before spring in response. It seemed that Lutz would be going with Benno to neighboring towns next spring to look over the plant paper workshop, so he would want Gil to be running the whole mine workshop before then. Oh, right, Lutz added. Next time I come here, there's going to be an apprentice with me. He's pretty close to coming of age, but yeah. Why? Is he going to take your place while you're gone? I tilted my head in confusion and Lutz frowned a little. On paper, he's here to help with the workshop just like me, but Master Benno actually wants him to learn to act like an attendant. Oh, right, he was mentioning that he wanted waiters for his Italian restaurant. I added a note in my diptych to plan around that too. Hey, mine, I got reversey and all that, but what about the playing cards? I wish we had different colored ink to use here, but there's no point in wishing for the impossible. We'll just use plain black ink for now. I drew the 4 card suits and the 9 numbers used on my stone slate, then drew 3 diamonds in the middle of a large rectangle as an example. We'll make 4 different sets of cards, 1 for each symbol, and differentiate the cards of each set using numbers. That's going to be a lot of cards, said Lutz. Hey, that symbol looks a bit like a divine instrument, Gil observed proudly while pointing at the diamond symbols. It's kind of like Maiden Shaft's spear, and that other one looks like Fruitrain's staff. According to him, diamonds look like the god of fire's spear, whereas spades look like the goddess of water's staff. Now that he mentioned it, the decorations around the divine spear's tip and the divine staff's face stones did indeed resemble these shapes. Incidentally, calling magic stones by their proper name face stones was getting drilled into my head, since that was important knowledge for the upcoming dedication ritual. Nobles and their quibbling over details never gave me any time for rest. In that case, Gil, what about Chusaria, the goddess of wind? Her shield's a circle, so none of those fit. Gidol, the goddess of earth's symbol, is the chalice, so it kind of looks like this. It seemed that the circle symbolized the goddess of water's shield, which, while an upside-down triangle, symbolized the goddess of earth's chalice. That neatly covered all 4 suits, and the change would probably make those in the temple more likely to accept them. On Gil's recommendation, I changed the card suits to spades, diamonds, circles, and upside-down triangles. I think I'll make the Jack, Queen, and King's cards be symbols too. Then drawing art for each one will be a pain anyway. I placed the Jack with a sword to symbolize the god of life, the Queen with a crown to symbolize the goddess of sunlight, as the goddess of light was known to commoners, and the King with a black cape to symbolize the god of darkness. The main aim here was to make the designs as simple as possible. I thought about what to do with the Joker, and settled on a twisted ring to symbolize the goddess of chaos, who had fallen in love with the god of darkness despite it being taboo, and spurred the god of life's jealousy to turn him into a stalker. Wow. Okay, perfect. Now they really do look like cards made in a temple. Yeah, and they'll be easy to understand since they show up on the cards too. Gil and I congratulated ourselves on the card designs, but Lutz looked at the slate with a conflicted frown. Mine, you really gotta make stencils to print these. No way will these all match up if we try and wing it. That's true. I'll make the stencil. I made a stencil out of thick paper, a process I was now very used to so that we could print the ink directly onto the board. I had more than enough time after all, and making stencils for something as simple as playing cards was a breeze. Alright, Mine, I've gotta go home now. I didn't want Lutz to leave, but I couldn't exactly ask him to stay overnight. Yeah, that would definitely be, scandalous if you're not even allowed to hug him. Okay, I nodded sadly, and Lutz pinched my cheeks with a troubled smile. I covered my cheek and glared at him. Don't look so sad. I'll be back tomorrow with Thule. You better, if you don't want me to die of loneliness. After we saw Lutz off, Gil looked down at me with worry. You're feeling lonely, sister mine? I'm so used to living with my family that I really missed them already. I knew that staying in the temple was safer for me, but I wanted to go home. It had been my choice to come here, and yet I felt as though I had been abandoned. Want me to hug you like you hug Lutz? Asked Gil, trying to help, but before I could even respond, I heard a loud, absolutely not from behind. I knew it! He's not even allowed to. I turned around in surprise to see Fran standing there with a scary look on his face. He walked up to Gil and chastised him quietly. Gil, sister mine is your master. Comforting her is not the place of an attendant. Lutz is a friend who she considers to be like family, and you are not in the same position as him. Got it. Gil nodded, his teeth clenched in frustration. Seeing that, Fran's expression softened a little. He then knelt in front of me to look me directly in the eye, his expression hardening once again. Sister mine, I understand that your extreme circumstances have left you feeling uneasy. Out of concern for you, I will overlook Lutz and your family comforting you. However, I request that you maintain the proper distance between you and your attendants. That sucks! What if she thinks of them as family? Huh? He gave me a strict reminder not to be too friendly with my attendants, and I couldn't help but look to where Lutz had been moments ago. He was already gone, and a cold wind blew in from the open doorway. It stung as it brushed my cheeks, but I was more worried about how lonely the winter would be than how cold it will be. Okay. I will see everybody next time.